One might argue that if Reyna had bothered to read the contract, she would never have married the Alpha King at all. But then again, if the Alpha King had not been so careful to keep his own half of it covered with his hand while she signed hers, she might have read it. So really, when one thought the matter through properly, the whole business was his fault. Every part of it, the marriage, the year, the room he built beside hers and swore to her was only for storage. Rena Sedge had spent her entire life reading the things nobody else troubled to look at. The set of a hound's ears half a heartbeat before it bolted, a lie sitting in the corner of a man's mouth like a crumb he had forgotten to brush away. She was, by trade and by temperament, the most attentive person in the Winter Palace, and on the coldest morning of her life, she signed away a year of it, without reading one single word. The Hall of Ledgers was not built for warmth. It was built for arithmetic, which is a colder thing, and it held the cold the way a well holds water. Reyna stood on the black stone, with her hands folded in front of her and counted the ways she was going to lose. Her father had died owing 400 crowns to a man named Gavin Thurl. He had also died owing her an apology, but that debt had gone unremarked in the ledger, and so it went unremarked in the hall. Thurl was not due until noon. He arrived a full hour early, which told her everything about how the morning intended to go. He came in, shaking snow from his shoulders like a man arriving at a supper he had been looking forward to, and he smiled at her across the room with the particular patience of someone who has already been told he has won. "Mistress Sedge," he said, "you look well. I look cold." "You will not be cold at Thurl Hollow." He let that sit. "We keep the fires high." There it was. Not a threat, because threats are from men who might be refused. Simply a description of her future, offered the way one describes the weather. The steward called the ledger. Sable Marrow was 90 if she was a day, dry as a pressed flower, and she read the sum aloud in a voice that made no room for feeling. 400 crowns against the estate of Renee Sedge, deceased. The estate consists of one house condemned, 9 hounds, the property of the crown, and one daughter, unmated, of sound body, 26 years old. Reyna had known those words were coming. It made no difference at all. Hearing your own life read out as the last item on a list of things a man might take instead of money does something to the spine that no amount of rehearsal prevents. "The debt stands," said Sable Marrow. "Has the debtor a defense?" Reyna opened her mouth. "She had nothing in it. She has a husband," said a voice from the door. Every head in the hall turned. Reyna turned last, because she already knew the voice, and knowing it did not help. Alpha King Thoreg Vane came down the length of the Hall of Ledgers without hurrying. He was not a handsome man in the way the ballads liked. He was tall and spare and unsmiling, and he wore the cold the way other men wore a coat, as though he had grown used to it long ago and no longer expected relief. She had seen him perhaps 5 times in her life, always from the kennels, always at a distance, always walking away. He did not look at Thurl. He looked at the ledger. "Read it again," he said. Sable Marrow read it again. He listened to the whole of it, with his hands behind his back, and when she reached the part about the daughter, unmated, of sound body, he did not react at all. Reyna, who had spent her life reading men, found that she could not read him. There was simply nothing on the surface to read. "Your Majesty," said Thurl. His smile had gone stiff at the edges. "The claim is lawful." "It is." Thoreg Vane finally turned his head. "It is also void if she is married before it is executed. That is the law you are standing on. It has 2 ends. You have only ever needed the one." Reyna's heart was doing something violent and stupid against her ribs. "To whom?" said Thurl carefully. "Is she married?" "To me," said the king. The hall did not gasp. It was not that kind of room. It went utterly professionally silent, the way a room of clerks goes silent when they realize they are about to have to write something down. He came to stand across the table from her, close enough that she could see the snow melting in his dark hair, close enough that she could smell him, which was worse, because he smelled like cold iron and cedar and nothing at all like a man doing something impulsive. 1 year, he said to her, quietly, as though the room were not there. To the day. It is an arrangement, not a marriage. At the end of it, you walk out of this palace with your debt burned, your name, your own, and enough coin to keep those 9 hounds in meat until they die of old age. He paused. I need a wife by law. You need to not be sold. We can be useful to one another for 1 year, and then never think of each other again. She should have asked why. She would think about that later, over and over, for the rest of her life. She should have asked why her... But Thurl was standing 8 feet away with his coat still wet, and the fires at Thurl Hollow were kept very high, and she was 26 years old, and had never once in her life been the thing that somebody chose. Where do I sign? She said. Sable Marrow laid the contract on the table. It was 2 pages, bound at the spine. The left page was hers. The right page was his. Raina signed her name. Her hand was steady, which she was proud of, and would be ashamed of later. Then the king took the pen and drew the contract toward himself and laid his left hand flat across his own half of it, while he signed with his right. He did not look up. He did not explain. He simply covered the words with his palm. The way a man covers a wound he does not want examined. And he wrote his name where she could not see what he was agreeing to. And Raina Sedge, who had spent her whole life reading everything, watched the one page in the world that mattered disappear beneath a hand. She woke the next morning in a bed that was too soft, in a room that was too warm, married. For a moment she lay very still, and let the ceiling be strange above her. It was painted. Somebody had gone to the trouble of painting a ceiling that nobody would ever look at except a person lying flat on her back wondering what she had done. 9 hounds. Her hands tucked under her chin. 9 hounds and her name back. And a year of her life. It had seemed like arithmetic yesterday. It did not feel like arithmetic now. There was a tray by the bed. Bread and butter and a boiled egg and a small folded card that said in a hand she did not recognize that the Alpha King would receive her at noon. She was dressed and out the door in the time it takes to lace a boot badly, and she went looking for Sable Marrow. She found her in the Hall of Ledgers, alone, filing yesterday as though it were any other Tuesday. I want to read the contract, Raina said. The old steward did not look up. You signed the contract. I signed half of it. You signed all of it that concerns you. That is not the same thing, and you know it is not. Or, you would look at me while you said it. Sable Marrow looked at her. Her eyes were pale and very tired, and there was something in them that Raina could not name, and that unsettled her badly, because Raina could always name it. The terms binding you, said the steward, are these. 1 year, ending on the last day of the winter fast, you will be his wife in the eyes of the court, the law, and the great court in particular. You will attend what he attends. At the end of the year, the marriage dissolves without fault, without scandal, and without any claim by either party upon the other. Your debt is already burned. I burned it myself at dawn, and I enjoyed it more than I have enjoyed anything in some time. And his terms? His terms are his. He is my husband for 1 year, said Sable Marrow. He is your circumstance. Raina stood in the cold hall and felt the floor of her understanding shift by a degree. Why me? She said. And the steward, who had answered every question that morning without hesitating, hesitated. It lasted less than a heartbeat. Raina caught it anyway, because catching things was the whole of what she was. Ask him, said Sable Marrow, and went back to her filing. The noon meeting lasted the length of a short walk. He stood the entire time. He told her, in order that she would keep her rooms and he would keep his, that she was to be seen at the winter table 3 nights in 7, that she should not go beyond the east wall alone, and that the Grey Court would be watching her for any sign that the marriage was not real. Is it real? She asked. It is legal, he said. That is what it needs to be. That is not what I asked. He looked at her then, properly, for the first time since the hall. And for one strange suspended moment, Reina had the distinct impression of a man standing behind a door he had no intention of opening, listening very carefully to somebody knocking. "No," he said, "it is not." She should have felt relieved. She catalogued, with some irritation, that she did not. She spent the afternoon walking the palace, because she could not sit, and because a scent tracker who cannot pace is a scent tracker who begins chewing on her own thoughts. The east wing was quiet. Her rooms were the third door along a corridor of 6, and she had walked past the others twice already before she noticed the fourth. It was newer than the rest. The wood had not weathered. The hinges were bright, and carved above the lintel, in letters that were unmistakably fresh, cut into new wood by somebody who had taken his time about it, was a word. It was her name. She stood in that corridor for a long, long time. Because the marriage was 1 day old, and the carving was not. He did not explain the door, because she did not ask him about it, because she had spent 9 years learning that the fastest way to make a thing disappear is to ask a careful man about it directly. So instead, she watched. She watched him for a week. It was the only way she knew how to be anywhere, and it was, she told herself, simply prudence. A woman married to a stranger, for reasons the stranger will not state, is a woman who ought to know where the stranger keeps his knives. What she found was this. He rose before the palace did. He ate standing up. He did not drink. He worked through the grain accounts himself instead of handing them to a clerk. And when the figures came out wrong, he did not shout. He simply began again from the top, which frightened his stewards considerably more than shouting would have. He was not charming. That was the thing she kept snagging on. Every powerful man she had ever met had been charming. Because charm is the cheapest tool in the box, and the most powerful men buy the cheap tools first. Thoric Vane had no charm at all. He had accuracy. He looked at a thing and named it correctly, and then dealt with it, and the effect of being on the receiving end of that was not pleasant. Exactly. But it was not nothing. On the 4th night he found her in the kennels. She was not supposed to be there. Queens did not muck out kennels, and she was aware, in a distant way, that she was technically a queen, in the way that one is aware that one is technically going to die someday. "You are wearing silk in a dog run," he observed from the doorway. "I am aware. The hounds do not care." "The hounds," Rena said, "are the only ones in this palace who do not." She heard him come in. She did not look up. The old girl at her knee, Hessa, thumped her tail twice at the sound of him, which was the single most useful piece of information Rana had gathered all week, because Hessa had bitten 3 lords and a bishop. "Your steward will not show me my own contract," she said. "No? Will you?" "No." She straightened up, then with straw on her hands, and she looked at him across the run and let him see exactly what she thought of that. He took it without flinching. He had a way of receiving anger that was almost restful. He simply stood there and let it be true. "The East Barracks are short of coal," he said instead. 9 tons requisitioned. 2 delivered. "It has been happening for 3 winters, and I cannot find where it goes, because every man I send to look for it is a man the thief already knows to expect." Rena went very still. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because nobody in this palace knows your face, yet," he said. "And because you have spent 9 years being able to tell which of 400 hounds walked down a corridor, and I do not believe that skill turns itself off when the animal is a man." She stared at him. "You have no authority here," he went on, perfectly level, "so I am giving you some. As of this morning, you may go anywhere in this palace, open anything that is not locked, and question anyone below the rank of duke, and if anybody objects, they may take it up with me, and I will enjoy it." The world tilted very slightly. "Why?" she said, and for the second time in her life, she watched Thoric Vane stand behind a door and listen to somebody knock. "Because you are the only person here who has never wanted anything from me," he said, and left. She did not sleep that night. She lay in the too warm bed under the painted ceiling, and turned it over, and turned it over, and got nothing, and eventually the sound started. It came through the eastern wall. A knocking, slow, and patient, and unhurried. Somebody was driving nails. Somebody had been driving nails for an hour, in the dead middle of the night, on the other side of the wall of her bedroom, in the room with her name above the door. She went out into the corridor in her nightclothes, with her heart going hard. The fourth door had a lock on it. A new one. Bright brass, no tarnish, not one scratch on the plate. She put her hand flat against the wood, and the wood was warm because there was a fire lit inside a room that was supposed to be empty, and she caught, faint, under the smell of new pine, the scent of a stranger. Sawdust and pitch and a workman's sweat. Not the king, somebody else was in there with him. Somebody with hands. Behind the door, very close, the hammering stopped. Nobody answered the door, and she did not knock again. That was the thing she would come back to afterward, when there was time to be honest about it. She stood in a cold corridor, with her hand flat on warm wood, and something on the other side of it, holding its breath, and she chose not to knock, because some part of her had already understood that whatever was behind that door was going to cost her, and she was not ready to pay yet. She went back to bed. She did not sleep. In the morning, she went hunting coal instead, which was easier. It took her 6 days. She did not do it the way the king's men had done it, which was by asking questions of people who had been rehearsing their answers for 3 winters. She did it the way she would have tracked a lame deer through spring snow, which is to say, she stopped looking for the animal and started looking for what the animal could not help leaving behind. Coal leaves dust. And dust settles. In the treads of boots, boots walk corridors. By the 4th day she had a route. By the 5th, she had a night. On the 6th, she stood in the dark at the mouth of the coal yard, with the wind coming off the north wall like a knife, and she watched 2 carts go out through a gate that was not supposed to open. And she memorized the face of the man who opened it, and she went and told the king. He listened without interrupting. When she was done, he was quiet for a moment. 6 days, he said. Yes, I have had grown men on this for 3 years. Your grown men, said Raina, were asking. Asking is how you tell a thief you are coming. Something happened at the corner of his mouth. It was not a smile. It was the ghost of the place. A smile might one day be built, if anybody ever bothered to lay the foundations. Come with me, he said. She thought he meant to the coal yard. He meant to the East Barracks at the cold end of the afternoon, where 300 men were standing a watch in coats that had been mended so many times there was more thread than cloth in them, and where the braziers had been cold for 2 winters, and nobody upstairs had ever bothered to come and look. He walked the whole length of it. He did not make a speech. He went to every brazier and put his hand in the ash and found it cold, and he did that 30 times, and by the 10th the men had stopped saluting and started simply watching him, which was worse and better all at once. Raina walked behind him and watched him do it, and felt something in her chest turn over like a stone in a river. You could have sent a clerk, she said, when they were out under the arch, and the wind had them again. I have sent clerks for 3 years. You could have sent one more. Yes, he agreed. And in 3 more years there would be more thread than cloth in this kingdom, and I would still be warm, and I would still be able to tell myself that I did not know. He looked out at the yard. Not knowing is the one thing a king does not get to be. Somebody said that to me once, and I have never been able to put it down. Who said it? Somebody who was very angry with me, he said. And correct, they stood there in the cold. And then, Raina did the stupidest thing she had done since signing her name without reading it, which was to open her mouth while her guard was down. Why me? She said. Not why a wife, why me? You had 400 women in this kingdom who would have signed anything you put in front of them and been grateful for the ink. Yes. So he did not answer for a long moment. Say the true thing first, he said, and I will match it. She could have refused. She would think about refusing for the rest of her life. Nobody keeps me, Raina said. It came out flat and fast. The way a thing comes out when it has been sitting behind the teeth for 20 years waiting for a door to open. My mother left me with my father. My father left me with the hounds. The hounds are the only creatures who ever came back, and they came back because I fed them. And I am not fool enough to call that being kept. She was looking at the wall, not at him. So when a man tells me he needs me for 1 year, and not 1 day longer, I understand him perfectly. That is not cruelty. That is the only offer anybody has ever made me that was honest about its own ending. The wind went across the yard. There, she said, that is the true thing. Match it. Thoric Vane was silent for so long that she began to think he would not. I have never once been wanted before I was useful, he said. She turned her head. Not by my father, who wanted an heir. Not by the grey court, who want a signature. Not by any woman brought to this palace in 9 years, all of whom were charming, and all of whom were sent. He was looking straight ahead, exactly as she had been. I have been extremely careful my entire life to be worth something, because the day I am not worth something is the day I find out how many of them were only ever here for the arithmetic, and I would rather not find out. So, I do not let anybody close enough to run the sum. He said it the way he read the grain accounts. No self-pity anywhere in it. Just the figure, named correctly. That is why you, he said, you never wanted a thing from me. You wanted your dogs and your name, and to be left alone. And when I offered you a crown, you looked at it like it was a debt with better manners. Now he did look at her. Do you know how restful that is? Raina could not speak. So we are two people who have never been kept, he said. That is all. It is not a romance. It is a shared condition, like a limp. And then Hessa began to scream. It was not a bark. Raina had heard every sound that animal could make in 9 years, and this was not one of them. It came from the kennels, high and torn, and Raina was moving before she had finished hearing it. The kennel gate stood open. That was the first wrong thing. The second wrong thing was the smell, and the smell was oil. Get back, she said. Thoric Vane did not get back. He went past her. He went through the gate ahead of her into a burning kennel with 3 men in it who had not expected the king, and Rena understood in one horrible clean instant that they had never been after him at all. They had been after the dogs. They had been after her, and he had known that, and gone in first anyway. The first man swung. Thoric took it on his shoulder and put him into the wall. The second came at Rena low with a hook knife, and she did what she had done to every panicking animal that had ever tried to open her, which was to give him her forearm instead of her throat and then break the joint that was reaching for it. The third one ran. And when the smoke cleared, and the water came, and the men were dragged out, Rena stood in 6 inches of ash, with her sleeve dark to the elbow, and looked at the Alpha King, who had walked unarmed into a fire, to stand in front of her. You went in first, she said. Her voice had gone strange. Yes, they were not there for you. You knew that. Yes. Then why? Thoric Vane looked at her with his hair full of ash, and something finally, badly, cracked in the flat surface of his face. Because you are mine for 1 year, he said, and I would like the year to be a full one. And he turned around and walked out of the kennel and left her standing there, with her heart going like a hammer, and behind them all, 9 hounds alive, and the whole world quietly rearranging itself into a shape she did not recognize and could not read. The coat was on the back of the chair. He had taken it off to have his shoulder strapped, and he had not put it back on, and it hung there, in the low room with the fire going, and in the pocket, plainly, unmistakably, hanging half out of it like a dare, was a key. No tarnish. Not one scratch on the plate. Raina Sedge stood 4 feet from it and did not take it. She thought about it. She thought about it with a thoroughness that frightened her, standing perfectly still, with her hands at her sides, and the fire snapping. And she catalogued every reason she was entitled to that key. She was his wife. It was her name above the door. She had been lied to about it twice. Once, by silence, which is the worst kind. She could have it open in the time it takes to draw a breath and know everything, and she would know it as a thief. She turned around and walked out of the room and closed the door behind her, and she was so angry with herself that she went down to the kennels and mucked out every run in the place with her injured arm, and did not stop until her hands were shaking, because she had wanted to leave the key where it was. That was the part, not that she had resisted, that she had not wanted it enough. Somewhere in the last few weeks, without her permission, the truth about that room had stopped being a thing she was hunting and started being a thing she was afraid of. And the difference between those two is the difference between a woman investigating a man. She was still holding the shovel when Ylva Rask found her. "So it is true," said Ylva. "They put a crown on my girl, and she is still standing in the muck." And Raina's whole chest unclenched at once, the way it had unclenched at that voice. Since she was 14 years old and starving in a ditch outside Marrowgate, Ylva Rask had found her there. Ylva Rask had fed her and housed her, and put her in front of the kennel master with one hand on her shoulder, saying this one is worth the trouble. And every good thing in Raina's life had come down that single road. She was 50 now, silver at the temples, warm as a hearth, and she opened her arms in the doorway of a dog run, and Raina went into them like she was 14 again. "You did not write," Ylva scolded. "I did not know what to write." "Married," said Ylva, holding her at arm's length, examining her the way she had always examined her, thoroughly and kindly, and without asking permission. "Married to that man. It is an arrangement. It is always an arrangement, sweetling. That is what they call it while they are getting what they want." She tucked a strand of Rena's hair back. "And when the year is up, then it ends. And you will let it?" Rena did not answer, and Ylva saw the not answering, because Ylva had always seen everything. "Oh," she said softly. "Oh, my girl, do not. I have not said a word. You are saying it with your face." Ylva laughed and drew her down onto the bench by the door. And they sat in the warm animal dark, and for an hour it was the best hour Rena had had in a month. Ylva asked about the hounds. Ylva asked about her arm. Ylva asked, with enormous gentleness, whether he was kind to her, and Rena found she did not have a word for what he was. And then at the very end, as they stood, Ylva said, quite lightly, brushing straw from her skirt, "They tell me he has been building something. Beside your rooms." Rena went perfectly still. "Storage," she said. "In the small hours of the night?" Ylva smiled. "Sweetling, I have known that family 30 years. Vanes do not build storage." She squeezed her hand. "Have you looked?" "No." "Why not?" And Rena Sedge, who could tell you which of 400 hounds had walked down a corridor, stood in front of the only mother she had ever had, and heard herself say the truest and most frightening sentence of her life. "Because I do not want to find out that it is nothing." That night the accounts came. She had asked Sable Marrow for the grain ledgers, meaning to be useful, meaning to distract herself from a door. And she sat down with them at midnight, and she read for 2 hours. And slowly, line by line, the floor came out from under her. 9 tons of coal to the East Barracks, not requisitioned, delivered, paid for out of a purse that was not the Crown's meat, to the kennels, every week, for 2 months. Firewood to the mending house, bread to the almswomen at Marrowgate, which was not even his city. And every single line, every one, was signed with the same private hand. Not the seal, not the Crown, just a small, exact signature in the margin. The way a man signs a thing he does not want anybody to thank him for. He had been feeding her people since the day he married her. He had never said one word about it. He had stood in the cold and told her it was not a romance. It was a shared condition, like a limp, and then he had gone quietly and paid for the coal out of his own pocket and told nobody at all. Rena put her head down on the ledger in the empty hall and did not cry, because she never did, and sat there for a long time with her heart going wrong in her chest. The winter table was 3 nights and 7, and she learned to survive it. She learned the Grey Court first, because they were the danger. Lord Halvard Grieve sat at the far end with his soft hands folded and his soft voice going, and every time he asked after her health, he was asking whether she was carrying a child. And every time she said she was very well, he wrote another day onto a calendar he kept somewhere behind his eyes. She learned to sit still under it. She learned to let Thoric's hand rest at the small of her back as they came in, and to not lean into it, which took more discipline than anything she had ever done. She was failing at that, and she knew she was failing, because it had stopped being 3 nights and 7. It was the mornings, first. He began taking his accounts in the small library instead of his study, and she began, for no reason, she was prepared to write down, taking her tea there. Neither of them mentioned it. They sat at opposite ends of a long table for 2 hours at a time, in complete silence. And it was the most peaceful part of her day. And one morning she looked up and found he had already been looking at her, and he did not look away, and she did not either. It was the hounds. Next, he came to the kennels. He came badly at first, standing at the gate like a man at the edge of cold water, and Hessa bullied him into it the way she bullied everyone, and by the second week, he was sitting on an upturned pail in a 200-crown coat, with a dog's head on his knee, asking her serious questions about bloodlines while the ash on his boots went to mud. It was his hands. That was unfair, and she resented it. He had scarred, capable hands, and he used them precisely, and she had started watching what they did, and it was the sound. Through the wall. 2-3 nights a week. The slow patient knocking of a man driving nails in the dark, and every time it started her whole body went still in the bed and listened, and every time it stopped she lay awake in the silence afterward, feeling as though something had been taken from her. She never went to the door. He never mentioned it. It sat between them in the room like a third person nobody would introduce. On the last night of the 3rd month she stopped pretending. He came into the library at midnight, which he never did, and he stood in the doorway with his coat still on and snow in his hair and said, "Grieve has moved to call the annulment early." On what grounds? On the grounds that there is no child, he said, and no sign of one, and no reason to believe there will be. He is not wrong. Raina set down the ledger very carefully. How long? He needs the Grey Court second. He will have it by spring. So we have less than we had. The fire moved in the grate, and Raina Sedge stood up, because she had been sitting down her entire life while other people decided how long she got to stay. "Ask me to stay," she said. Thoric Vane went absolutely still. "What? You heard me perfectly." Her heart was slamming. "You have never asked me for one thing. Not once. You gave me my name, and my dogs, and a year, and you have never once asked me for anything. And I have spent 3 months watching you not ask, and I am tired. I am so tired." Her voice cracked, and she let it. "So ask me. Ask me to stay past the year. Ask me for something, you impossible man. Because I have never in my life been asked, and I would like to know what it sounds like before the spring comes and takes it away." He crossed the room. He did not hurry. He came. The way he came at everything. Straight and unwavering. And he stopped in front of her close enough that she had to lift her chin. "I have not asked," he said low, "because the day I ask, I will not be able to unask. And I have read our contract. Raina, every word of it. I know exactly what I signed. Then tell me what it says." "No, Thoric." "Ask me for something else," he said, and his voice had gone rough for the first time since she had known him, and it undid her entirely. "Anything else. Ask me for anything else in this world. And it is yours." And Raina, who had never been kept, and never been chosen, and never once asked for a single thing she wanted, put both hands flat against his chest and felt his heart going as hard as her own. "Then, stay tonight," she said. He kissed her. It was nothing like she had braced for. There was no charm in it, and no strategy in it. It was the kiss of a careful man who had run out of care, and it was thorough and unhurried, and it went through her like a struck bell. And her hands were in his coat, and his were in her hair, and the ledgers went off the table, and neither of them heard them land. She had spent her whole life being useful. Nobody had ever touched her, simply because they could not stop. He lifted her without effort, and she wrapped herself around him, and the whole world narrowed to the heat of him and the sound he made against her mouth. When she pulled his shirt free, low and wrecked, and entirely undefended, from a man who had never once been undefended in front of anybody. "Rena," he said, and it was not a question, it was a surrender. "I know," she said. "I know." Afterward, in the dark, she lay with her cheek on his chest, and listened to his heart slow down and felt him breathing. And she was happier than she had ever been, and she lifted her head to look at him. And she saw the wall, above the fireplace. The winter calendar hung there. Every household had one. Every household marked the fast, and somebody, in a small, exact hand, had circled the last day of it in ink. The last day. Their day. The day it ended. He had been looking at it every morning for 3 months, from the far end of the table, while she drank her tea. The bond broke open on a wet night in the thaw, and she killed it with 4 words. There was a feast for the turning of the season, and the grey court came in from their estate smelling of wet fur and money. Lord Halvard Grieve kissed her hand and asked, softly, after her health. "I am very well," she said. "You look tired." His eyes were kind. That was the awful thing about Grieve. His eyes were always kind. "The winter has been hard on all of us. Still, spring is coming, and the court will want its questions answered." "The court may want whatever it likes." "Yes," he agreed, "that is precisely the difficulty." She got away from him. She got away from all of them, out onto the north gallery where the ice was letting go of the roof in long, slow tears, and she stood there with her hands on the cold rail and breathed. Thoric found her, because he always found her. "Grieve has his second," he said. Rena closed her eyes. Whenever he chooses to use it, he came to stand beside her. He did not touch her. "I want to say something, and I am going to say it badly, so I would be grateful if you did not interrupt me." "You are never grateful." "I am extremely grateful," said Thoric Fane. "That is the trouble. I have been grateful every single morning for 3 months, and I have not once been able to say it out loud. Because I signed a piece of paper that will not let me." She turned to look at him. The mask was gone. She had never seen it gone. What was underneath was not a stranger, which somehow made it worse. It was simply him, without the accuracy, without the flat, correct surface. A man of 31, standing in the wet dark, with his whole face open, like a house with the doors flung back. "I do not know how to be wanted," he said. "I have no practice at it. I am very good at being needed, and I have built an entire kingdom on the difference." He swallowed. "And then you asked me to stay the night, not to sign anything, not to fix anything. And I have not been the same man since, and I would like you to know that it was not nothing to me, Thoric." "That is all," he said. "That is the whole speech. It was worse than I expected." And Rena reached up and put her cold hand against his cheek. The world went white. It was not a feeling. That was what she would never be able to explain afterward. It was an arriving. Something came down the length of her arm and into her chest and unlocked a door she had not known was in her, and on the other side of that door was him, all of him, the whole enormous, terrible weight of what he had been carrying pouring into her without permission. Fear, fathoms of it, a grief so old it had gone smooth, like a stone in a river, and underneath it all, running under everything, steady as a heartbeat, a want so patient and so hopeless, that it stopped her breathing. He had wanted her for months. He had never once said it, and he had built a life around never saying it. And she was standing inside it now, and it was so vast that she could not see the edges. Rena Sedge tore her hand away. They stared at each other in the dark, both of them shaking. "Did you?" he said. His voice had gone to nothing. "Raina, did you feel mate?" The word was right there. It sat in her mouth, whole and hot and enormous. And it meant, kept, it meant nobody leaves, it meant the year does not end. And she looked at the man who had circled the last day of it, in ink, on his own wall. And she was so frightened that she could have been sick. "It was the cold," she said. Everything in his face went out. "The cold," he repeated. "It is nothing. It was nothing." She was already stepping back. "We are tired and the court is here and we have both had too much wine. You have not touched the wine." "Then, I am tired," she said. And she watched him take it. That was the part she would carry for the rest of her life. He did not argue. He did not accuse her of lying, though he knew, because he had been standing inside her, too. He simply gathered himself back up, piece by piece, and put the flat, correct surface back over the top of it, and when he spoke again, his voice was perfectly level. "Of course," he said. "Forgive me." They went back in together. He put his hand at the small of her back at the door, because the gray court was watching, and it was the most terrible thing she had ever felt. The wine came round at midnight. She was not thinking about it. She was thinking about a man's face going out like a lamp. The steward's boy came along the gallery with the tray, and he offered it to the king. And Thoric reached for the cup, and Raina's whole body seized. She did not smell it. She would tell them later that she smelled it, and it was a lie. What she felt was the hair coming up on her arms and something in the base of her skull screaming in a language older than words, and she knocked the cup out of his hand before her mind had caught up with her arm. It shattered on the flags. The wine went across the stone, dark as a wound, and in the silence afterward, kneeling over it, she got the smell at last, bitter and green, and underneath the fruit, faint as a whisper. "Do not touch it," she said. Thoric crouched beside her. He looked at the wine for a long moment. "Wolfsbane," he said. "Enough to kill you." "Enough to kill an alpha," he agreed very calmly, "which is a considerably harder thing, and therefore a considerably more expensive thing, and therefore a thing that perhaps a dozen people in this kingdom could afford." He straightened. "Say nothing." She stared up at him. "What?" "Say nothing." He was already smiling at the gallery, at the guests, an easy public smile she had never seen on him before, and hated instantly. "There are 40 Grey Court nobles behind that door, and if they learn that somebody tried to kill me under my own roof tonight, they will have their annulment, signed by Dawn, and they will be right to have it. A king who cannot keep poison out of his own cup cannot keep a kingdom." "Thoric, promise me," he said. And she looked at him, and she was still full of him, still ringing, like a struck bell, with everything she had felt on that gallery and refused out loud, and she wanted so badly to give him one single thing. "I promise," she said. She followed him within the hour. She was not proud of it. She waited a slow count of 100, and then she went after him, keeping to the wall the way she had learned to move behind deer, and she watched him go down through the dark of the palace and into the archive under the west stair, and she stood outside the door with her heart going like a fist, and then she opened it. He was at the long table, papers everywhere, and in his hands, open, half-read, was a bundle of letters in a hand she would have known anywhere in the world, because it had been writing to her since she was 14 years old. Alva Rask's letters, and underneath them, spread across the table in the lamplight, page after page of a file with her own name on it. Thoric Vane looked up. For once in his life, the man who always had the correct word did not have one. "Say something," she said. He set the letters down slowly, like a man laying down a weapon in front of someone he did not want to frighten. "Sit down, Raina. Do not tell me to sit down." Her voice did not sound like hers. "There is poison in your cup, and you tell me to say nothing, and then you come straight down here in the dark to read letters written to me by her." She was shaking. "So tell me what this is, and do not manage me." I have watched you manage dukes for 3 months, and I will know if you start. He was quiet for a moment. Then he pushed the file across the table toward her. I have been investigating Ilva Rosk for 2 years, he said. The words went into her, and did not stop anywhere. They were just noise. They meant nothing. She banks the Grey Court, he said, in the same steady voice. She has done for a decade. The coal, the grain, the meat, the spears. All of it goes out of this palace, through gates she owns, and comes back as money she lends, to the men who want my throne, at interest, and they cannot move against me without her, and she cannot be touched without proof. He did not look away from her once, and I could not get proof, because every man I ever sent came back with nothing, because she always knew he was coming. No, said Raina. Raina. No, she had her hands flat on the table. She pulled me out of a ditch. She fed me. She has written to me every month for 12 years. She is the only person in this world who ever came back for me. And you are standing there telling me. She stopped. Because something cold and very quiet had begun to assemble itself in the back of her head, and it was building itself out of things she had said in her own voice. She always knew he was coming. Raina heard herself speak, and her voice came out flat and strange. You needed somebody close to her, she said. Somebody she trusted. Somebody she talked to. Thoric. Vane said nothing. That is why me, Raina said. Not the debt. Not the crown. You needed her girl. He held her eyes, and he did not deny it. Say I am wrong. I cannot, he said. The floor went. She had to put a hand on the table. She was aware, distantly, of her own breathing being wrong, and of the archive being very cold, and of 3 months of her life quietly turning inside out behind her eyes like a coat. Every question he had ever asked her. Who did she write to? What did she tell them? Where had she come from? Who had placed her in the kennels? Who had recommended her? Who had she thanked? She had thought he was interested. You have been reading my letters, she said. You have been reading my letters for 3 months while I... She could not say it. She would not say it out loud in that room. Not all of it was that, he said. And for the first time his voice cracked. Raina, I need you to hear the whole of it. Not 1 hour of what happened in that library was. Why did you not simply ask me? She rounded on him. If you suspected her, ask. You are the king, ask. Because you would not have believed me, said Thoric Vane. And that stopped her, because it was true, and they both knew it was true, and it was the ugliest true thing that had ever been said to her. You would have gone to her, he said quietly. You would have gone to her that same night, out of loyalty, because you are loyal. It is the whole architecture of you, and she would have known within the hour that I was watching, and she would have burned every ledger in Marrowgate before the sun came up. He shook his head. I have had 1 chance at this in 9 years. I could not spend it on a hope, so you spent me instead. Yes, he said. At the beginning, yes. She wanted him to lie. She realized it with a kind of horror. She wanted him to stand there and lie to her, and give her something to forgive. Read the letters, he said. His voice had gone hoarse. Not for me. Read your own letters, Raina. Read what you told her. I will not. You told her the coal schedules, he said. You told her the watch rotations. You told her which gate was mended and which one was not, because you were a girl who was proud of her work, and she was the only person who ever asked how your day had been. He put his hands flat on the table. She has not needed a spy in this palace for a decade. She has had a daughter. Raina stood in the cold archive and heard, very clearly, in her own head, the sound of a voice that was not hers. Ilva's arms around her in the ditch. Ilva, stroking her hair, nobody keeps anybody's sweetling. You are worth exactly what you are useful for, and there is no shame in it. It is only the truth, and the truth is a kindness. She had carried that sentence in her chest for 12 years. Like a stone, she thought was her own heart. It was not hers. It had never been hers. It had been put there, carefully, patiently. by a woman who needed a girl who would never expect to be kept and would therefore never leave. "Oh," Reyna said. And then she said nothing at all for a long time. "Reyna," he said, "do not." "I love you," said Thoricvain. "I have loved you since you told me nobody keeps you," and I could not think of a single thing to say in reply that was not a promise I was forbidden to make. She looked at him. "You did not think I would believe you," she said. "About her? No. And you were right. Her eyes were streaming, and she did not touch them. That is the part I cannot survive, Thoric. You were right. You looked at me and you weighed what I was worth to you. Exactly the way she taught me. Everybody always would. And you got the sum correct." She walked out. Ylva Rask was waiting in the corridor. Of course she was. Rena came out of the archive with her whole life in pieces behind her. And there was Ylva, 10 paces down, standing in the lamplight with her hands folded. And every part of Rena that was still 14 years old wanted to run to her. She made herself walk. "My girl," said Ylva, "you are white as a sheet. I am tired. You have been crying." Ylva's warm hands came up and cupped her face, and Rena stood there and let a murderer hold her face, and did not move a muscle. Oh, sweetling, what has he done? And there it was, the little push. 12 years of little pushes, all of them so gentle that she had never once felt the shape of the hand. "He has been lying to me," Rena said, and let her voice break, because it did not need any help. "I know." Ylva's face was soft with sorrow. "I have known for weeks, and I could not think how to tell you, Rena. He signed the annulment this morning." Rena went very still. "What?" "Halvard Grieve showed it to me himself, signed and sealed at the 10th bell, in his own study, in his own hand. He is casting you off, my love. He has had what he needed from you, and he is finished." Ylva's thumb stroked her cheek. "And the room beside yours, the one they will not let you open. Do you know what is in it?" Rena's heart stopped. "Storage," she said. "A nursery," said Ylva gently. "A cradle and hooks on the wall, and a little bird at the window. He is building a lie, sweetling. A nursery to convince the Grey Court that a child is coming, so that they will hold off the annulment long enough for him to find a wife who can actually give him one. He has been building it in the dark next to your bed while you slept." And Rena Sedge stood in the corridor of the Winter Palace and went very quiet and very clear, the way she had always gone quiet and clear at the exact moment the tracks stopped making sense. Because at the 10th bell that morning, Thoricvain had been sitting at the far end of the small library table with her, in silence, drinking nothing, for 2 hours. He had not signed anything. Ylva Rask was lying to her face. And that was the smaller of the two things. The larger one was the bird. Rena had never opened that door. Rena had never seen inside that room. Sable Marrow would not speak of it, and the king would not name it, and there was one lock on it and one key, and the key lived in his coat. And a banker from Marrowgate had just described the contents of it to her, item by item, down to the shape of a toy at a window, which meant she had a man inside a carpenter. Somebody with sawdust on his hands and pitch under his nails, who went home to Marrowgate and told her what he had built that week. Rena's hand did not go to her belt. She thought about it. She thought about it with a great, cold, careful hunger, and she did not do it. Because Ylva Rask had 400 men in Marrowgate, and Rena Sedge had 9 hounds and a bad arm, so she let her face crumple instead. "What do I do?" she whispered. Ylva's eyes sharpened. It was the smallest thing. A tightening, half a heartbeat long, and Rena had seen that exact expression on Hessa 100 times. In the half-second before a rabbit finally breaks cover, something in her chest died quietly. Something else was born. "You come with me to the Grey Court," said Ylva. "Now, tonight, while he is still in the archive, you stand up in front of Halvard Grieve, and you tell them the truth, sweetling, that the marriage was never real. That he coerced a debtor into his bed to hold his throne, She squeezed Reina's hands. It cannot come from me. I am a banker. They will say, I want his gold. It must come from his own wife. They will destroy him. Yes, said Ylva Rask, and smiled at her with enormous tenderness. They will. The grey court sat in the winter hall. 30 of them, and Halvard Grieve at the head of the table with his soft folded hands, and the king standing at the far end alone, because they had already sent for him, and he had already come. He looked up when she walked in behind Ylva Rask. His face did something. It lit, for half of 1 second, helplessly, and then he saw who she had come in with, and it went out, and he simply stood there and waited for her to end him. My lords, said Ylva, the queen has something to say. Every head turned. Rhaena Sedge stood in front of 30 men who owned everything and looked down the length of that table at Thoric Vane. I am sorry, she told him without a word. In the world, I should have believed you. Then she turned to Halvard Grieve. The Marchioness Rask tells me the king signed an annulment at the 10th bell this morning, she said, clear and flat and carrying. That is untrue. At the 10th bell this morning, the king was sitting the length of a table away from me in the small library, where he has sat every morning since we were married, and I will swear to it before any court in this kingdom. The room went absolutely still. She has also told me just now in a corridor, Rena went on, exactly what stands inside a locked room in the east wing. The cradle, the hooks, the bird at the window. She let it sit. I have never opened that door, my lords. I have never seen inside it. My husband has never named it, and his steward will not speak of it. And there is one key to it, and he carries it himself. She looked slowly around the table. So I would ask you to consider how a banker from Marrowgate comes to know the shape of a toy on a windowsill in the king's own house, and which of his carpenters she pays. Ylva said, this is grief. She is not herself. Search her rooms, said Rena. Search Marrowgate. Search her ledgers tonight while she is standing in front of you and cannot reach them, and see whether you find a wronged girl or 10 years of the king's coal. Her chin came up. There is wolfsbane in this palace, my lords. Enough to kill an alpha. It went into his cup 4 hours ago, and I knocked it out of his hand. Ask yourselves who in this kingdom can afford such a thing. Halvard Grieve looked at Ylva Rask for a long, long moment. A search, he said quietly. Cost you nothing, Marchioness. And Ylva Rask's face changed. The warmth went out of it, the way heat goes out of a room when a door opens. All at once, and what was left was not a mother at all. And Rhaena finally saw the thing she had been living beside for 12 years. Alva came at her fast. Rhaena had been reading her since she was 14. She saw the knife before it left the sleeve, because she had spent half her life watching those hands, and she caught the wrist and turned it and put the Marchioness Rask face down on the winter table among the Grey Court's own papers, with a knee in her back and the arm bent up wrong. Rhaena leaned down to her ear. You told me I was worth what I was useful for, she said. You should have been more careful what you made me good at. Then the guards had her, and it was done. The hall emptied. The lords went out in tight whispering knots. Somebody took the knife. Somebody wrote it all down. And then it was the 2 of them in the winter hall. You saved me, Thoric said. He sounded wrecked. Rhaena, after everything. You still? I stopped a traitor, said Rhaena Sedge. That is all. The light went out of his face. The bond is real, he said. You felt it. I know that you felt it, because I felt you feel it. Yes, she said. Her voice was perfectly steady, which cost her more than anything ever had. You looked me in the eye every morning, for 3 months, and let me believe I was more to you than useful. You do not get to say the word mate, and have that undone. Rhaena, please, I will do anything. There is nothing to do, she said. The contract runs to the last day of the winter fast. I am a Sedge. We pay what we owe. She walked to the door. I will see you at the winter table, 3 nights in 7, Your Majesty, and then I will go. There were 280 days left, and she stood every one of them. That was the thing nobody afterward could ever quite believe. She did not run. She could have gone that same night. The debt was burned, and no law in the kingdom would have chased her. She stayed because she had signed her name. So the spring came, and the summer, and the long, slow resting of the autumn, and Raina Sedge sat at the winter table 3 nights in 7, with the queen's chair beneath her and the queen's ring on her hand, and she was faultless. She was gracious to what was left of the grey court. She answered Halvard Greaves' soft, kind questions about her health. She stood where she was told to stand. And she did not speak to her husband once except when the room required it. He never asked her to. That was the unbearable part. He never once came to her door, never once caught her elbow in a corridor, never once used the enormous machinery of being king to make her sit down and listen to him. He simply let her go, one day at a time. For 280 days, he wrote instead. The letters came to her door, not every day, perhaps 2 in a week. Some were long, and some were 4 lines, and some were not about her at all. A pension dispute, a question about hounds, a bad joke about a duke. As if her opinion were still worth something to a man who was losing her, she read every one. She answered none. She kept them all in a box under the bed, which she never once admitted to herself. I keep trying to write an apology, and it keeps turning into an explanation, which is a coward's apology wearing a coat. You said that I weighed what you were worth to me. You are right, that I did. What I cannot make you believe is that I finished the sum in the first month, and have spent every day since holding an answer I am not permitted to give you. I do not want you back because you were useful. I want you back because the library is a very small room and I cannot sit in it. And on the last day of the winter fast, 1 year to the day, Sable Marrow read the dissolution aloud in the Hall of Ledgers, in the cold, on the black stone, in a voice that made no room for feeling. It took 4 minutes. The king signed. His hand was steady. Raina signed. Hers was too, and she hated herself for it. Nobody stopped it. There was no speech. Nobody came running through the doors. The clerks wrote it all down, and the ledger closed with a small, dry sound, like a bird landing. And Raina Sedge walked out of the Winter Palace, with her name, and her 9 hounds, and a box of letters she had told herself she was throwing away. Marrowgate in autumn was grey and wet, and smelled of coal smoke, and she took a house at the edge of it with a run for the dogs, and she was, by every measure a person could name, free. The letters followed her. They came to the new house within a month, which meant he had found out where she was, and had never once come to the door. She did not know what to do with a man who could find her and would not knock. She did not answer them. She read them by the fire, with a dog's head on her foot, and did not answer a single one, and every time a new one came, she felt the same thing, which was a kind of terrible relief that made her furious. And then, in the 8th month, they stopped. The last one was short. Raina, you have made yourself clear, and I have been slow. And I am sorry for that too. I will stop, now. Be well, and let the dogs get fat. She read it twice. Then she sat very still in her own house with her own name on the door, and the fire going and everything she had asked for, and she discovered that she could not breathe. Sable Marrow came at the end of the 9th month. She came in a hired trap, 90 years old, in the rain, and she stood in the doorway of the kennel and looked at Raina with those pale, tired eyes, and said, "The east wing is being closed." Raina's hands went still in the straw. "He is emptying it," said Sable. "The rooms are being stripped, and the doors are being sealed, and the 4th door is being sealed with them. He has given the order to have it done before the frost. So I have come to tell you that if you ever intend to see what is in that room, you have until the frost to do it. It is not mine to see. It has your name over it," said Sable Marrow. "It has had your name over it since 11 days before he ever walked into the Hall of Ledgers and told the world he was your husband." Raina stood up. 11 days before," she said slowly. 11 days, said the old steward. I know. Because I watched him carve it. He did it himself, at night, badly, with a chisel he did not know how to hold, and I told him he was a fool. And he agreed with me, and he kept going. The Winter Palace was very quiet. Nobody stopped her. The guards knew her face. She walked up through the cold halls and the emptied rooms with her heart going hard and her boots loud on the stone, and she came at last to a corridor of 6 doors in the east wing. The fourth one stood open, because the sealers had begun. Raina Sedge stopped in the doorway. It was a small room. That was the first thing. Somebody had chosen the smallest room in the wing and put a window in the east wall of it, so that it would get the morning. And in it, everywhere, was a year of a man's hands, a cradle. Made, not bought, joined at the corners, the way a man joins a thing when he is teaching himself out of a book. One corner clumsy, and the next one better, and the last one very fine, so that you could read him learning it simply by walking around the thing. A shelf, low to the floor, hooks along the wall at a child's height, 9 of them, and carved above each hook in the same slow bad chisel work as the name above the door, the name of one of her hounds, Hessa, Bracken. Every one of them, he had asked her their names once. In the kennels, sitting on an upturned pail with the ash going to mud on his boots, and she had told him, and she had thought that it was small talk. And on the sill of the east window, where the morning would come in, a wooden bird on a string, she put her hand over her mouth. He built it in the first month, said Sable Marrow from the corridor, before the coal, before the thaw, before you ever asked him for a single thing. He told me it was storage. He told you it was storage, Sable agreed, because he had signed a paper that would not let him tell you what it was. Raina turned around. What paper? She said. Sable. What is in his half of that contract? And Sable Marrow, who had refused her once in the cold, in a hall of ledgers, on the worst morning of her life, looked at her for a long moment. Then she reached into her coat and took out 2 folded pages, bound at the spine. He told me to burn it, she said. I have been meaning to. I am 90. I am very forgetful. She put it into Rena's hands. Read it in the hall, said Sable Marrow. It was signed there. It ought to be read there. The hall of ledgers had not changed. It was still cold. It still held the cold, the way a well holds water. The black stone was still black, and the long table still stood in the middle of it, and Alpha King Thoric Vane was standing on the far side of that table with his hands behind his back, because Sable Marrow had sent for him and had told him nothing at all about why. He saw her. He did not move. Raina, he said. She walked the length of the hall the way he had walked it a year ago, without hurrying, and she laid the contract on the table between them, and she opened it to the right-hand page. His hand came out too late, and he knew that it was too late, and he stopped. Do not, he said. You covered this with your hand, said Raina Sedge, so that I would sign without seeing it. I have thought about that hand every day for a year. She looked up at him. Sit down, Thoric. He sat down. The Alpha King of the Winter Kingdom sat down in a hall of clerks because a kennel woman told him to. She read it out loud. The party of the second part, being Thoric Vane, undertakes the following. That at the expiry of 1 year, all property held by him privately, and not by the Crown, passes entire to Raina Sedge, without condition, whether she remains or departs. Her voice was steady. She had promised herself that it would be. That in the event of her departure, no claim shall be made upon her, no debt named against her, and no reason asked of her. She turned the page. And that at no point within the term of this contract shall the party of the second part ask the party of the first part to remain. The hall was completely silent. Not once, Raina read. Not in word, nor in writing, nor by any indirect means, that she may not at any point be obliged to refuse a king, that anything she gives unasked. She set the page down. She looked at him. He was looking at the table. You signed away your right to ask me, she said. Yes, for a year. Yes, You carved my name over a door 11 days before you knew whether I would even take your hand, she said. So do not tell me you married me for Ylva Rask. You knew about Ylva Rask for 2 years, and you did nothing. Then a debt was called on a kennel woman, and you were in that hall inside the hour, with a contract already written. Thorek Vane closed his eyes. Both things are true, he said. That is the whole of my crime. I needed somebody she trusted, and I had watched you across a yard for 2 years. And when the two lined up, I told myself it was strategy, because strategy was the only word I was permitted to want you in. He looked up at her. I would have found another way to Ylva Rask. There was no other way to you. You built a room with my dog's names in it, she said, and you sat the length of a table from me every morning for 3 months, and you had bound yourself, in writing, with your own hand, from saying one single word about it, Raina. Why? She said, and her voice finally broke. Why in the name of every god would you do that? And Thorek Vane looked up at her, and there was nothing on his face at all except the truth, which he had been carrying alone for a year. Because I have been wanted for my usefulness my whole life, he said, and I would rather have died in that room than do it to you. You were a woman with a debt, standing in a cold hall, being sold to a man with a warm house. If I had asked you to stay, you would have stayed. You would have stayed because I was the king, and because I held the ink, and because nobody had ever kept you, and you would have taken what was offered. And I would never, for the rest of my life, have known whether you meant it. He spread his hands. So, I made it impossible, he said simply. I made it so that the only way you could ever be mine was if you came and got me. And then I built the room, and I waited. And I lost. Rena Sedge stood in the Hall of Ledgers and looked at the bravest frightened man she had ever met in her life. Then she picked up the pen. What are you doing? He said. She wrote at the bottom of his page, beneath his name, in a hand that was not steady at all. Then she turned it round and pushed it across the black stone table to him. He read it. He read it 3 times. She watched him do it. Say it out loud, she said. You are not permitted to ask. I have checked, but I am. And Thorek Vane, with a shaking hand, read out what she had written under his own signature. Keep me, he read. No year on it. He looked up. Rena. You do not get to say. No, her eyes were streaming. It is written down. And you signed it a year ago, and I have only just filled in the rest. That is how contracts work, Your Majesty, as you have been at some pains to teach me. She leaned across the table. So keep me, and do not you dare take it back. He came round the table so fast that he knocked the chair over. And in a cold hall built for arithmetic, on the black stone where she had been sold, Rena Sedge was kissed by a man who had spent a year forbidding himself to ask, and she felt the bond swing open between them like a door blown wide in a storm. And this time she did not let go, and this time she did not call it the cold. They were married again in a spring, badly and beautifully, and the whole city came out for it. She had expected to be calm. She had been calm through a fire, a poisoning, and a knife. She got 4 words into her vows and had to stop, and stand there, and be looked at by 6,000 people, while she got hold of herself, and Thorek Vane simply waited, holding both her hands, wearing an expression of such open and undignified joy that half the front row started crying instead. Tilda Rosk died in the debtor's tower at Marrowgate in her 61st year. Rena did not go, and did not write, and slept perfectly well. The east wing was not sealed. That small room got the mourning the way it had been built to. And in the second winter of their marriage, a very new and extremely loud person was carried into it, past 9 hound names cut badly into a wall by a man who had never learned to hold a chisel, and was laid down in a cradle with one clumsy corner and one that was very fine. You built this before you knew, Rena said. I built it because I did not know, said Thorek Vane. That is the whole of what love is, so far as I have been able to work out. Building the room anyway, she would have argued. But he was right, and by then she had more or less given up telling him so.